Um, this is Hannah. And Hannah, could you pronounce your last name for us, just in case?
Souls.
Souls.
Like,
I got that right the first time. I'm just learning English. Just kidding. But I'm famous for mispronouncing names. So glad you cleared that up. So today we're going to talk about, Hannah, we're going to talk about all kinds of different subjects. So, Hannah, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
yeah. So I'm Hannah Souls. I currently am in Michigan, but I'm trying to get to Austria and to work with university students.
Awesome. And just as a question, did you tell us about a time when maybe someone mentored you and how did it positively impact your Christian walk?
Yeah. So I think since elementary school, I've been really mentored well. I think God has brought a lot of people in for certain seasons. But just looking back over the last 5 years, when I was at Bible school, my dean mentored me really, really well. And currently, I'm being mentored. I meet with a lady every 2 or 3 weeks over Zoom. And I think what both of those ladies have done really, really well is modeled prayer really excellently and uh, are really good at asking good questions to me, which just propels my love for God, for His Word, and also for prayer, which is a big thing I'm growing in.
Awesome. And we'll talk about that into prayer a little bit later on that. So tell us a little bit about your testimony, how you became a Christian.
Yeah. So I was really blessed to grow up in a Christian household, attending church every Sunday and in Sunday school, VBS, all the Wednesday night stuff. And I prayed with my mom when I think I was 5, right around that age. And uh, something I love my parents for is they were just such big servants in the church, and they really, really modeled that well. And so I've just grown up with that influence and with conversation about God, both at church and at home and in the car. And so I've just been raised up in that.
Awesome. So how did you get into student ministry, and why is student ministry your passion? Because I know you serve very well in your church, and you serve
Mhm.
in student ministry there. So tell us about your passion for student ministry.
Yeah, it was kind of a surprise. I went to Davenport University for database uh, programming. And when I was at school, I just started seeing my campus in a very different light due to a couple different roles I had. So I was a resident assistant in the freshman dorms for 3 years. And InterVarsity got started on my campus, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship started a chapter my freshman year. So I got to get plugged into that to see that grow over my time there. I led a Bible study my second year there for freshman ladies and had some other roles too. And it just made me so aware of, I guess, the phase of life that students are in. I think that's an optimal time to reach students because they're already kind of questioning what they believe. They're on their own for the first time and asking like, do I actually believe what my parents taught me to? And you can meet them with the answers because they're ready to listen, to ask those questions. Um, and I've just seen God reach students at that time, even if it's just they have believing roommates and maybe they haven't known a believer, learned to trust a believer, and then now they're living with one. And just God can use those relationships too.
Amen on that one. So what brought you to World Venture?
Um, Tim and Joan Cummings, they have been long time friends with my family. They're actually my neighbors now. So I walk past their house when I walk our dog with my mom. But uh, in my junior year at Davenport, I had to do an internship, and my dean of students found a way to get a Pathfinders trip with WorldVenture to tick all the boxes for an internship. And Tim and Joan really helped me through that process. And ever since then, they've just really been intentional about praying for me and answering questions about missions. And they were actually missionaries in Austria, so everyone thinks there's this conspiracy, and they talked me into going to Austria, but it really kind of was a surprise for both of us. But they've just always kind of been there to answer questions, and because I could have those conversations with them, and because I was familiar with WorldVenture, it really kind of just was a natural path to WorldVenture.
Awesome. So just as a heads up to everyone, as we're talking, you can feel free to interrupt us and put your questions in the chat. We'll be happy to talk to you as well. This is a three-way conversation here. So just put in the chat, and that way I can see if you have a question or comments or anything. We'll talk about that, what you put in the chat. So Hannah, tell us a little bit more what you plan to do in Austria.
Yeah. So a lot of the Austrian team there are actually church planters, and I'm kind of coming alongside of them with the goal of discipling university students to step into leadership and servant positions in those churches. But I'll be joining a campus ministry called Austrian Student Missions, and their main goal is to evangelize and to disciple well the university level. Less than 1% of the population in Austria are evangelical believers. Overall, the demographics of Austria would be Roman Catholic, but most of the younger millennials, Gen Zers, the people currently going through school are agnostic. So there's a big shift there. So I will start working with the international students in Vienna. A quarter of all the students are international, and a lot of them, their common language is English, so it kind of makes sense for me to plug in there until I get better at German. And then I will continue to work with the international students and also work with some Austrian students, both in Vienna and possibly in some other cities. With a lot of discipleship, we want to be evangelizing alongside the students, and we want to see them leading Bible studies.
I'm in there. So you mentioned in your ministry profile that, and you talked about just now about the students, some of them being agnostic, where people, they don't see a need for God. Go into detail about that a little more and give some examples of what that looks like. And tell me about how you reach someone who doesn't see a need for God.
So the verse that I often think of when I think of Austria is Isaiah 55:2, which says, "Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy?" And I really see that in Austria. So specifically Vienna is a very comfortable city to live in. It's very safe. You can go to school for free. There's no tuition costs. It's the healthcare is great. There's just a lot of things to do. So when you're comfortable, you often don't think about God. Like I guess you, as in the general humanity, people just don't consider a need for God because life is pretty great. I was talking to a couple that work with international students in a different capacity in Austria, and they said of Austria that religion is their money. Or sorry, money is their religion, just because they're looking for success, however they might define that, whether it's family or career, and so that becomes their main drive. They're not thinking about God. And so I think a way to really start having those conversations is just to ask questions. I mean, I often think of Ecclesiastes in those situations. And so it's just asking the questions of like, are you happy? What does happiness look like? Is this satisfying? And eventually you're going to get to the point where people are really thinking about that. And I think that can open the door for gospel conversations. And also looking at the epistles about how this is the very opposite. Paul does have joy. He does have peace, and his life was not comfortable. And I think putting those side by side for certain people can really open that door.
Awesome. So speaking of the Cummings, they are online right now.
Oh,
And
hello.
so they had a question. Hannah, what do you see as your biggest challenges / any fears?
Like when I get to Austria, I think one of the uncertainties will be friendship, since I am going solo. And obviously, I'm landing in a place where I don't have built friendships waiting for me. But I also think that could have its advantages because it's going to push me to build those relationships. And the people my age are not much older than the university age. And so I do think that's going to help me plug in. But that is definitely an uncertainty, and I think a challenge I'll face.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Joan and Tim. So tell me, what is your level of support at right now?
I am about halfway. I think the computer
Awesome.
shows 48%. But
Awesome.
in reality, I'm probably a little bit higher than that.
So if you'd like to ever support her, either monthly, quarterly, annually, you can actually, I put the link in the comments, and you can go to it. She has a nice description there and a nice photo, a nice description there. And it tells a lot of details that you can learn more about Hannah's work. So let's talk about how can people pray for you?
I think the three big ways right now is that I would transition well, that I would say those good goodbyes, and especially with family. I've got some grandparents that aren't doing really well health wise, so there's a lot of uncertainties when you leave. Then also right now, I am a youth leader at my church, and just part of transitioning out of that is being replaced. And I don't really know where my replacement is coming. So if you could pray for that. And funding, God knows where it's coming from, and he's got a timeline. So pray that it not only does come in, but also that I would really have faith and patience in that process.
So Joan and Tim ask you an additional question. They asked you, what has support discovery taught you?
It has taught me that I might have a plan, and it might look very differently in reality. So right now I'm meeting with a lot of churches, and that is actually looking different than I thought it would be. Right now I'm going, I kind of have a loop of churches I'm going with, and going to, and I'm meeting and praying with them. And I'm seeing that God is using that more than just support raising, but it's really growing a love for his church, and a love for prayer. And so God can do a lot of things all at once.
Awesome. Catherine's online right now. So hello, Catherine. She asked the question is, can you talk about your prayer times with churches? I'm not sure
Yeah.
what she means by that, but go ahead and share what you think she means, and we can go into further detail on that.
So this was a Catherine challenge.
Oh,
She said because I got to the point where I said, Catherine, I think I'm at the end of my contact list. What do I do? And she said, all right, I want you to just get a list of churches in the West Michigan area, and schedule your week, and just visit churches and just walk in and ask whoever you see, whether it's a janitor or a pastor, whoever it is, just how can I pray for you? And I've done that. And the first day was like so intimidating. And the first person I did meet was a janitor. And they were just totally surprised. And it was like by the third church that day, I was like, I love this. This is fantastic. And as I have now, there's certain churches I've gone to like 3 or 4 times. It's been so encouraging to me because I've gotten to see God answer their prayers. One of the churches, specifically, they said we have way too many people, which is like the best problem ever. They said we don't have parking space for these people, and we are going to have to switch up the way we do services, because at that point they were just doing one service. And like the second time I visited, they said, well, we've got some things we're voting on. And then the third time I visited them, they said, we're starting a parking lot project next week. And then I visited there yesterday, and they said, wait, we have to put it on hold because we realize VBS has to happen. And the parking lot will be a total mess, and we don't know where to put great games. So it's just every time I visited, I got to see another step and see how God was answering prayer and then giving them wisdom and really directing conversation. So I've just seen those type of things happening at churches all over, and it's shown me how God is so faithful to answer prayers, but also that he's just doing really good things with his church body.
Yes, definitely. So we have Mary Claire Culver. She asked the question, and hello, Mary Claire. How is your German language coming along?
It's coming. Right at the end-ish of COVID was when I took my first German class, and it maxed out, so we couldn't meet in a classroom because there wasn't enough space to spread out. So I had to do it over Zoom, which is not an ideal way to learn a language. But I mean, I'm still obviously working on it now that the class is done. But I'm less intimidated than I was. But I still know I'm definitely going to learn a lot better when I'm surrounded by it. But I'm appreciating the language. There's quirks that I really enjoy. So I'm less intimidated, but there's obviously so much work to go.
Yeah, I can imagine. I know that a lot of our workers, it takes them a couple of years to learn a language. Mm-hmm. That's good. You're getting a head start on that. That will be really helpful. So going back to the prayer life thing, when we talked before, you were focusing on having a deeper prayer life in this waiting time. So beyond visiting the churches and everything, what does that look like for you?
Right now I'm letting the Psalms start my prayer. I think because I want to start with focusing on who God is, because I think that directs so much of how we respond, both in how we live our life, but also how we're going to come to him in prayer. So every day I read a psalm and a Proverbs, and so I let that Psalms be kind of the launching point for prayer. But I'm in this position right now where oftentimes I'm praying out of obedience. Like God says I should pray, so I'm praying. And something I'm discovering is that by the end of the prayer, that's not my attitude anymore. I'm really hungry to talk to him. And he's continuing to grow different elements of my prayer. So I've seen my attitude change, but something I'm still working to develop is, I was talking to a lady in our Bible study last week, and we were talking about how it's really hard to kind of bring our personal prayer requests. I can pray for other people, I can pray for the church really easily, but I feel so selfish saying, God, help me with this. And that's not biblical. Like he says, bring me those things. So like Matthew 7 has been a passage I've been looking at where he's talking about like your heavenly fathers, I mean your earthly fathers give you these things, and how much more does your heavenly father want to take care of you and to provide for you. And that was something that popped into my memory earlier this week because I was stranded in a Myers parking lot because my car decided it didn't want to take me home. It's like, I'll bring you to Meyer, but not take you home. So I'm like, well, I'm gonna call my dad because I know he loves me and he's gonna help me. I wasn't quite sure where in the state he was at that point because he travels a lot, but he picked up the phone and he figured out how to help me. And that was just a reminder of, all right, if this is what you knew, you could call your dad because you knew he would take care of you. And in that moment I was like, oh yeah, I should also ask God because he's my heavenly father and he loves me and he will answer my prayers. And it was just a reminder when that verse popped in my head in that moment. It was a really good metaphor for me.
Awesome. So we have a couple other visitors, Dan and Jane Stout,
Mm-hmm.
are watching from Kentucky. They said, we love and support Hannah. And a Ben Lauer says, go Hannah, go, go, go. We've got a question from Jane Stout. How are your parents doing knowing you will leave soon?
I think we're still in this spot where it's still so hypothetical, but it's getting more real. So I think recently my mom and I've had some conversations that she'll just be like, "Oh, you're leaving," and like around the holidays, it was just thinking like, "Oh, this is possibly the last Christmas," and so I pulled out some more Christmas decorations and like this stuffed Santa that my mom got when we were in the hospital when I was born. And so just like pulling those things out, it's things like that are just making it more real. But my parents have been so supportive, and so it's kind of this dichotomy of like, I want you to do this and I'm supporting you, but also like, don't leave me. And it's led to some really good conversations though. And I definitely love my parents and they love me.
Awesome. So we usually go into this time of talking about the different topics that we have posted this week on WorldVenture. So we had the Browns who talked about basically who was mentoring someone by text message. They're in the U.S. And they deal with refugees, and this one was an Afghanistan refugee. And he talked about how he shared Christ through text messaging. So through that mentoring relationship, tell me why, in your opinion, is mentoring others so important?
I think it's important for us to mentor people because I think it helps both the person you're mentoring and helps us. So I'll talk about that first one first. First, it's something God told us to do. So the Great Commission is to disciple others and to teach them to obey what he's commanded us. And you can't teach them without a teacher. So people need mentors. And especially with, well, not just with new believers. Growing and learning it's a lifelong pursuit because none of us are going to like arrive. So we need to continue to teach, to model the way God wants us to live, and to help others grow. But it's also going to help us. When I am mentoring someone, I'm digging deeper into his word because I'm getting asked questions that I might not have considered, or it's been a really long time. So I find that I'm reading scripture more. I'm praying for them more. I'm helping them learn to pray, which is obviously something I've said that I'm trying to work on now. And I know that there's someone watching me. So I'm very more aware of how I'm living before God and before others. So it's helping us, it's helping them, and it's something God commanded us to do.
Awesome. So we also posted from Jonathan from Southeast Asia. We posted some of his photos last week of he's very engaging and very much mentoring others and talking to people in that restricted context. So how can our audience, and also this coming up in May, we have an online event with our mobilizer who'll be talking about how to engage young adults. So on that topic, how can you encourage our audience to engage with our university students out there, or any students out there? What are the struggles or needs that you've observed of the students?
Well, thinking about when I was a student, for believers, one of the intimidating things is finding a church, especially with how convenient online church is. So if you attend a church that's close to a university, just be looking for students, be welcoming, introduce yourselves, get to know them, invite them to sit with you, ask if they have a reliable transportation to church. But for all university students, universities have changed a lot since I was even a student. Truth has always been challenged, but I feel like it's more blatantly in new ways being challenged. So know that that's happening and kind of educate yourself on what those are. And because of that, be ready and open the door to conversations. I think another change that I've seen or heard about, I have a friend who works with InterVarsity at Davenport, and he was saying that one of the ways that schools have changed too is when I was a student, when he was a student, you would kind of have a pizza party to get people to come and then be like, hey, here's God. But now students aren't really looking for events that don't offer more value than just entertainment. They're looking to have those conversations. They're really wanting to discover new ideas, whether that's worldview or religion, about God. Like they're looking for that. And so I think that should propel us to ask students, what do you think about this? Just don't wait for the conversation to happen, but start the conversation. And be aware enough to know what to talk about, and to be able to answer questions, but also don't be intimidated if you don't have the answer. Just say, we can look this up together, or I'll get back to you. Like, just don't be intimidated.
Yeah, that's what I always tell people is you don't have to be the expert. You can always tell people, even online, is just, hey, let me get back to you on that question, but do get back to them on that question.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think the key is, it sounds like, is that spending time with that generation, finding time to meet for coffee or something, or
Yes.
tea or whatever. But so we got some new people on here. We have Connie Holsinger.
Yeah.
So she says she's praying for you from Sanford.
Thanks,
Ginger Whedon is, just tag somebody in it, so we might get a new person in there. Hello, Ginger. So we had a Gordon Ellison. I don't know if you know them, Rita and Gordon.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Gordon wrote a really great devotional on our blog called I Never Pray. And I would encourage all of you to go to our blog, worldventure.com/blog, and look into that article. It's really goes deep into prayer. But it starts with I never pray because that's the person he encountered. I never pray. And so tell me about if you've ever encountered a student who has said, I never pray, and what is their reasoning? Have you ever found that people have encountered discouragement in prayer? Can you describe that? What would you say to them right now?
Two of the reasons I've heard students give for not knowing or for not praying is either they don't think it's effective, or it's just intimidating and they don't feel like they know how to do it. So one of the ways I think we can show them that it is effective is being intentional about saying when you've seen God answer your prayer, or ask them, how can I pray for you? And then follow up with them and say, hey, do you feel like that was answered? And just showing them in that way that prayer is effective and God is faithful to answer prayers. And I think a lot of times we as believers often will ask God for things and then forget to thank him for those.
Yes.
So build that habit too. But also, I think a lot of students don't feel like they know how to pray. Um, and so I think modeling prayer for people, or and that again is happening in relationship, is a really good thing, and show them that it doesn't have to have this flowery like big church
Mhm.
word formula and language. Like, it's a conversation, and it's okay to talk to God like we talk to our friends because he's our friend.
Yes,
um,
definitely.
and so I think that can make it so less intimidating, and just help them start where they are, and help them grow from there.
Awesome. So I want to remind everyone she is at 48% support right now. And if you want to see her go, we'll need to get a monthly, quarterly, or annual support. You can go to the link that's in the comments. We still have a few minutes. If you'd like to ask some questions, I would hurry up and put them in now. Otherwise, what will happen is I can actually email Hannah all the questions, and then she can answer them either directly or through WorldVenture, and we'll send you the answers. We got Mary Claire has a question. Do you know anything about the accessibility of the Bible in Austria? Also, here in the States, we have many translations. Is that true there too?
I don't know how many translations there are, but I do know that it is accessible. And the German translation is actually a very, very good translation. Just the grammatical structure and the different cases made it a lot easier to translate into German. And so, for example, when I was got to visit Austria, I was able to join a small group Bible study, and we were talking in English, and I had a question. I said, I'm not sure. Looking at this, like, what does this pronoun point back to? And he's like, let me pull out my German translation, and he did, and he was like, oh, it's very obviously this person. So it's in some ways probably a little easier to read if you understand German. Um, so they do have it very accessible and very readable.
Okay, good. Okay, any other questions out there? Put them in the chat. We're about to close out our time. I will ask one more question that I think would be very interesting to our audience. Um, how are Austrian students different from U.S. students?
Well, Austrian campuses, universities are different in general. In America, students generally go and they live on campus in dorms, and that's not the way universities are structured. So students aren't really in a student bubble because they're not just living with other students and walking to classes. But also for international students, they're going to have a much different experience studying in Austria than they would studying in America because the cultures are different. Austria is not that hospitable of and a welcoming place. So international students tend to group together because it's harder for them to make Austrian friends that are going to teach them the culture. Where in America, at least my experience working with international students, there were a lot more Americans that were excited to meet them and excited to show them what it means to be America and how you do things here. So if that's exciting for us as a ministry, because if the Austrian believers and the churches are countercultural in that way and really welcoming and really reaching out, that can build some really good friendships a lot easier. But also for the Austrian students, that can make it a little more difficult to reach them because they've already got the friends they need, and they're all set there, and they might not be as excited to get to know you and to have different conversations.
Awesome. So Ginger has a question, and I know you answered that earlier in the video, but I will repeat it because we've got some others that have just joined. She asks, are you headed, where exactly are you going in Austria? And yes, she is going to Austria. Where exactly are you going to a specific university? So just kind of repeat a little bit what you said earlier.
So I'm going to Vienna, which is the capital city. Most of Austrians live in cities. I think it's 2/3 of the population do, and a quarter of the population lives in Vienna. So it's one of the very largest cities there. And there's 5 universities there. So a ton of students, very multicultural place. And it's just a place I'm excited to go.
Awesome. All right. Is there any other questions before we close our timeout? I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank Hannah for joining me this morning. We both are drinking our coffee, which is very smart. And I want to thank you for all your questions, and definitely keep on praying. If you roll back the video, you'll see her prayer requests about midway through. And if you jot them down and pray for her for those, and a reminder that she is at 48% support. She can't go to Austria unless she gets to nearly 100% support. So thank you everyone for joining us. And just as a reminder, many thanks to our headquarters people who have helped people like Hannah be sent to places like Austria and other places. So thank you for your work behind the scenes that none of us out here see. So thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.